that I don't trust YouTube because they say you're connected and then you are not, and you can spend 20 minutes talking like an idiot and then not be connected. So refreshing again, and we're in. We're in. So hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on the time you're watching this, the time zone, because as my guests know, we are doing time travel.
That's right.
From here to my guest time zone, we're six hours behind us. So we actually time travel on the internet. As I was saying, good morning, good afternoon, good night, depending on the time you're watching this. And my public service announcement of the day. As usual, close to the mic so you can hear me. Wear your fucking mask. Let me repeat. Wear your fucking mask. As I always say every day, and I will repeat it until the pandemic is over, the mask is not for you. The mask is to protect others from you. That's why we use them. To protect your elders, to protect the children. If anybody tells you children cannot get the coronavirus, COVID-19, that's a lie. They can, and they can die too. And your elders are a risk population, and you have to take care of them. And if anybody tells you, I don't care about your life, I don't care about masks, change friends. That's safer for you. And as I always say, then this is the last thing. If you don't care about anybody else's safety and you think you shouldn't wear a mask because you're special, or you don't care about anybody else, leave this channel now. I don't want you here. I don't want potential murderers in my channel. With that said, in my polite ways, as I said, how are you, my friend? How's things?
I am great. Like I said to you before, when we started, all things considered, when you consider the state of the world right now, I feel very blessed and very lucky. We're doing okay here.
Mm-hmm. How's things in your neck of the woods? How's things in upstate New York? Is it getting better?
It's
second wave like in Manhattan, or
there is in such extreme numbers, but it's going up. I think it's going up across the country. My biggest fear is not really what's happening right now. My biggest fear is we have Thanksgiving coming up this week, and what's going to happen 2 weeks after that. Because unfortunately, there are a lot of the people that you're talking to out there who are not paying attention. I think there are a lot more of them in this country than in your country. So I think we're going to see a lot of big gatherings for Thanksgiving, and then 2 weeks later we're going to see. That's where we're going to really see a wave. And I hope that let that be the wave that crests and starts going down. And I pray that as we get new leadership in this country, people who can get a better handle on this, that it will change in the new year.
Okay. No, and do you have any kind of lockdown at nights or something, or limits?
No.
We don't really... how many people can get together at the same time?
Yeah, there are limits on who can get together, but honestly, I don't even pay attention to that because we don't really get together with anybody, or if we do, in the warmer weather, we have a back porch. Maybe someone will come sit on the back porch 6 feet away, just one person, and we'll chat or whatever, or in our yard or something like that. But we're not having gatherings by any stretch of the imagination. If my daughter comes to visit, she makes sure that she's been tested before she gets here. We've been very, very careful, very careful. I don't want to take any chances for myself, for my family, or for anyone else. As you were saying, it's for other people too.
Absolutely. Imagine I'm your doctor. My name is Victor Frankenstein. This is my syringe. It's just a rotring, but let's play that. I just popped it into you and said, pandemic is over. We're safe. You can do whatever you want. What's the thing you've been missing for months that you're saying, oh my God, this is the first thing I'm going to do when I'm able to?
What's funny is some really simple things. Just going out to a store and being able to walk, just to go buy groceries and actually go in the store and walk up and down the aisles would be like a miraculous thing. To go out to dinner with my wife, would be a miraculous thing. I haven't been out to dinner, my God, since February probably. Little things like that. And then you think about professionally in terms of comic book conventions. That will be an amazing when we can do that again, when we can all gather in large numbers and not be afraid. And that's gonna take a little while, because I think even if it's, quote, officially over, right, and we all have vaccines and we've all been vaccinated, there's going to be a psychological ramifications for people too.
Oh, yeah.
We've all been traumatized by this. So even if someone says yes, it's safe, how ready will you be to walk into a hall filled with 10,000 people?
You won't be, because that sense of paranoia.
Yes.
I don't know if this guy is vaccinated.
Right.
You can't know. You
Yeah.
can do, like a vaccination card, but what? Are you going to get it on your forehead
Right. A
and just
little.
leave? Are you going to show your iPhone every time?
We'll all get tattooed, right? Oh
Yeah,
God, what
like
a horrible thought. What a horrible
vaccination card
thought.
too. Does anybody want that? No, it
No.
reminds us of things we don't want to think about. So it's not
Exactly.
exactly a good thing.
Exactly.
So, but
Yeah.
I think that anyway will be when we're in conventions, whether we like it or not, you will see how people, instead of being in a row, in a queue like this, they're going to keep the distance.
Yes.
And
I think
people,
this is
you're
going
going to see a lot of people with masks anyway, even
Mhm.
if there's vaccination.
I think this is going to change our behavior culturally for years and years and years and years to come. Years to come. And probably, it could be in a very good way in the long run too.
What is the aspect you miss of conventions? Is it that the work side, or the human side of meeting with your peers, who probably you don't see more than once or twice a year?
Yeah, it's two things. Yes, it's really fun to get together and see other professionals. As I always say, I spend most of my time alone in a room playing with my imaginary friends. That's my life, So when we have conventions, and in recent years, not just conventions within the United States, but conventions around the world. So for one thing, it's a chance for my wife and I to travel, which is always fun. Or if my wife can't come, I'll meet up with my son or with my daughter. So we have family time, which is great. You get to go hang out with your fellow professionals, which is always nice. I always end up sitting at a table next to Keith Giffen, it seems, wherever I go, which is always fun. And then there's the joy of just meeting the people that read the work. And that to me is really the heart and soul of it. It's like to spend time with people that have read and enjoyed and appreciated my work, that it actually means something to them. Because when you're alone in your room, in your head, you have no idea the impact your work has out in the world, and not until you meet people and you speak to them. And I've had some very moving experiences with people, and I really, really appreciate when people take the time to step up and tell me what those stories have meant to them. And then it's one thing when it's here in the United States, when I go to another country and I realize there's some guy in Spain or Greece or Italy or Mexico who grew up reading my work and it means so much to them. Who could ask for anything more,
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's also, does it happen to you that there's a convention, whatever it is, that you go every year, and some of the fans have become real friends, and you are like missing that person you're gonna see every year, and you remember the time for that comes, but this year hasn't happened, and you remember, oh, this is the time of the year when I was going to see this person or this person, and just chat about life for like 30 minutes in my table.
Right, which is always nice. It's interesting too, because sometimes I'll go and you'll be at 3 different conventions in 3 different parts of the country, and the same person shows up, because there are a lot of people that like to travel around and go to conventions. It was like, I'll be in New York, and didn't I just see you in Virginia? Didn't I just see you in North Carolina or California? And it's a funny thing. It's a funny thing. And there are certain faces that you do see again, and sometimes they're faces that you've seen years before, but somehow you remember that you met them and you spoke to them. And then there are people that you have a really deep connection with. So when you see them again, it really is like that. It feels like, oh, you really have connected in a deep way, and it's a nice reunion with a friend.
Have you realized? I've heard 2 answers to this, so I want to know what's been your experience. As a writer, have you noticed that you're overworking because of the lockdown, or the other way around? Is it been difficult for you to focus and to do the work because of the situation?
Both. In the beginning, it was hard for me to focus, and work had slowed down a little bit, and I was actually spending more time playing music than I was writing, because I'm a musician too. So I've been recording a lot of demos and playing and singing and doing that. And then what I realized was, this is the time to really get a lot of fun new projects off the ground. So I'm working on 3 or 4 different create our own projects right now with some artist friends, and developing those, as well as a couple other projects, for the companies. And so right now it's very, very busy, but it took a while. I had to get to a point where I thought, I'm sitting here in this lockdown, in this weird little bubble that we're in. So this is the time to create. Let's take that project that I've wanted to do for 5 years, and let's do it. Yeah. Let's do a Kickstarter. Let's put it out digitally. Let's do whatever it is, because the state of the industry right now, in comics anyway, is it's very tenuous. It
Yeah.
feels very tenuous. Like I always say that being a freelancer is like tap dancing on quicksand. You have to tap dance really quickly so you don't sink and so that everyone sees how well you tap dance. But right now it feels like our whole industry is on quicksand right now and everyone's trying to tap dance to stay above it, So we don't know where things are going to be in 6 months or a year or anything. But I think it's true, not just for me, but a lot of people. I think a lot of people are taking this time to go for those dream projects that they wanted to do, that they put on the back burner. So my hope is that next year you're going to see a lot of great work from a lot of different people that's come really from their hearts,
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was Livermejo who gave me the perfect metaphor for this, but a lot of other people in this 123 with you in the last 6 month conversations, that the phrase was, before this started, there was a hill in front of you. You could never jump it because you were afraid of the precipice, what could be behind that hill. But more and more as this is happening, you feel attracted by the hill. Like, you know what? The more time it passes, the more I want to jump and see what's on the other
side. And I think there's going to be a lot of great work on the other side of that hill next year. I think we're going to see a lot of great work.
And absolutely. And there's also another, I was talking to Ross Ritchie on Friday, and it was like, he thinks that, of course, he's at Boom, so that would be good for him too. But he was telling me one of the things that we are going to take out of the situation is that more people is going to realize it's not only Marvel and DC, what's there. And I kept thinking, no, a lot of people is going to realize that the real numbers are outside the direct market. Because people is going to realize how much Rainer Telgemeier or the creators, or Dogman or other things that I didn't notice before, they're going to check and say, oh, that sold 1 million copies. But that wasn't supposed to happen. These comics don't sell more than 100,000. And then it's when I tell them, but the direct market is not the real world.
Exactly.
And I think that situation is going to point to a lot of creators to say, look at the real world. Step out of the bubble, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. My whole career, I've tried to sort of balance working in the mainstream and doing creator-owned projects and going back and forth between the two, working in different genres, So it's so important just on a creative level. I love those characters. The DC universe, the Marvel universe, between my comic book work and my work in animation, I couldn't have been doing it all these years if I didn't love them.
Absolutely.
But as you said, there's a whole world out there that's very, very different. And so I'm very grateful that I've gotten to do all kinds of different projects over the years, not just in comics, but in TV and film and all these things, because you just to stay interested as a creative person, you have to branch out. You have to. I think if I had just done superhero comics and nothing but that all these years, I would have been done a long time ago, I think.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say you could have burned out a lot earlier, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it would be not repeating yourself, but in a way, it could be claustrophobic for you as a creator.
That's exactly right, because it's you're in a specific room. That's that room. That's that genre, and that's that room. And even when you push just so far, you can stretch out, you can do interesting things, but you're still in that room. And you're sitting in, let's keep the metaphor going. You're sitting in a big house with a lot of rooms, and you got to get up and explore those other rooms and see what's in there. Yeah. And so, like I said, I feel very lucky that I've done, my superhero stuff. I've done the funny stuff with Giffen. I've done very personal creator-owned things, fantasy things. I've done kids fantasy. I've done autobiographical comics. I've done everything, and then I've done all this other TV and film work too. So it keeps you fresh.
Yes.
The great thing about being a creative person is, doesn't matter how old you are or how long you've been doing it. When you're starting a new project, I always say the blessing and the curse is it's as if I've never written before every time I start a new project. Now, yes, I have a certain skill set that I've developed, but every time you're facing the blank page and you're starting from nothing to build something, it's a challenge, and you have to approach it with, in Chinese philosophy, they call it beginner's mind, to approach life with a beginner's mind, which is a certain kind of innocence, as if you have never done that before, because that keeps you awake and aware and creative, and that's the beauty of what we do. But sometimes it's scary, because I've been doing this for a long time, and sometimes I sit down and I'll say to my wife, I don't know how do you write a story? I don't know how to write a story, because it always feels like a new challenge every time. How have I done this for so many years? Well, how does this fit together? And then, of course, it starts to cook and it all starts to go, you know?
Yeah, a writer friend, a very famous Spanish novelist, told me years ago that he felt that the moment he didn't feel the dread and horror of the blank page, he would quit. He later told me, if I stop feeling that, even after 20 novels, having a lot of stuff adapted for TV, a couple things adapted, for movies and all that,
Right.
and books of him have had, like 20 prints, so he's a really important novelist. He's like, if I stop feeling that dread, that horror of not being able to feel the first word in a novel, I will quit.
Right. I keep trying to figure out ways to kind of take that anxiety and just turn it into, and that is what happens. That anxiety turns into creative energy is what happens. Yes. I've seen it as a musician too. Whenever I have to perform, I get very, very anxious. And then I get on stage and that anxiety becomes this power that gets shot out into the audience, and it's the same thing in writing, whatever anxiety there is building up about facing that blank page, it may even be part of the process of opening up that door to the unconscious, because really it's all about opening that door to the unconscious. And then that opens and out it comes. Although the easiest way for me, the best way to start a story is when I wasn't planning on starting a story. Mm-hmm. And what happens is I'm laying in bed or I'm just, staring into space, and I start to see little movies in my head, and that's the way a lot of stories have started. I'm just, well, what is that? That's an interesting movie. I've never seen that before. And I follow the characters and I follow the story. Then I realize I got to run to my computer and write down the movie that I just saw in my head. Yeah. And the more unexpected that movie is, the more surprising it is, the more fun it is.
Yep. Jason Aaron was telling me yesterday exactly that, that a lot of people doesn't realize that. He was telling me, most of the work I do, believe it or not, is when I am just, in front of my computer, staring at the space. You are just like that. And suddenly it just pops. And it's most of my work is not, the typing is just a technique, put it into the paper. Mm-hmm. But it's here. The work is here in your mind. And people think you're just staring at the space. No, you're having the whole story developing, right?
Yes, exactly. I've said exactly the same thing. The real work is someone could walk into my office and I'm laying on the floor with my mouth hanging open, but that's the real work, because I'm following the dream. I teach a writing class periodically, and I just did it for the first time this past 2 weekends online, and I talk about this a lot. This consciously writing from the unconscious. Mm-hmm. The more you become aware that it's the unconscious mind that's in charge of this game, the more you get out of the way and let the unconscious come through. The conscious mm-hmm. mind is great to come in later as an editor. Yes. Clean it up, fix it up, structure it better, play with the pipe of the story, kind of like a plumber comes in and fixes all the pipes, but the real joy and magic of storytelling is when I get out of the way and literally things that I feel like I've never even thought of are coming through my head, mm-hmm. like they're coming through from another dimension. And it really, when it's really working, that's how it feels. Like there's another dimension of story out there somewhere, and someone's beaming this stuff into my head, and I get to express it.
There's a school of thought, as you know, that thing, that there's a fine line between us and the other side and the other multiverse. The other parts of the multiverse, and in some cases they are all communicated, but never because of the conscious parts, but because of the unconscious. I always say we have the strong force, the strong nuclear force, and all of that, but then also have a really, really weak gravity. So it's possible that in the other multiverses we have really strong gravity to compensate. So those ideas can easily really come from the conscious side of you that is in another universe.
Right. There's our intuition, and I think living through our intuition is a very important thing. And the intuition to me is the doorway to the unconscious, mm-hmm. and then the unconscious is the doorway, whether you call it other universes, other dimensions, however you want to look at it.
The name doesn't matter in the end.
And there's the wonderful idea that I've thought about so many times over the years. It's like, okay, so I'm writing this story. If I'm creating a story from the ground up, am I writing about something that already exists? So, and I felt that with certain stories, like this is a world that exists out there, and I'm just writing about it. Or is the act of writing actually creating this world on another dimensional plane somewhere? Mm-hmm. So I really felt that I did a children's fantasy with Mike Plug called DeMATTEIS, one of my favorite things I've ever worked on, and that really felt like these characters from that world were like sending me these stories. But then I thought, well, are they sending me the stories, or is the very fact that I'm writing about them creating this whole other world someplace else?
Yeah.
It's a fascinating concept. Especially if you get into sort of the Eastern idea that this is all a dream anyway. This is our consciousness is projecting this dream. So there's levels and layers of dream and dream and dream, and they're all intersecting. And it's fascinating. But that's the part of writing that I love most. It's just when that door to the unconscious is open and things are coming through me that surprise me that I don't expect.
Yeah. In a way, we are all the dreams of others, right?
Yes.
And we project our dreams into others.
Yes.
So we create the reality. You have a daughter, as I do. My daughter is 6 years old, and I always felt since my wife was pregnant, since my daughter was born, that in a way, conscious or unconscious, we project our dreams and our experiences to the next one. So we create a person that is based on us, whether we like it or not. And then when you are writing, when you're creating that world, you're making it real. The
Yes.
people who read it feels it's real. They are not feeling, oh, this is a fiction, because they do good and get invested. They feel it's real.
Well, we invest these universes with every aspect of ourselves, So every character in some way is a piece of our own consciousness. And so they do have life in that sense. I also feel like this universe that you and I are sitting in, that's what it's like, to me, God, in whatever form you imagine God to be, is the writer of this whole game. He's writing this story and he is all the characters.
Mm-hmm.
But part of the game is that in order for the story to play itself out, we have to forget that we're the guy that's also writing the story. We have to actually believe that we're these limited characters when we're also the God that's writing the story at the same time.
Yeah.
And I love this stuff.
Yeah, that was the most fascinating. I guess you've watched Interstellar, the movie, the Christopher
Yes.
Nolan.
Mm-hmm.
I know that a lot of people hated the ending. We can spoil it. That was 6-7 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But I love the ending because the end, it was all science from beginning to end. But by the end of the movie, those 5-dimension guys, the conclusion is the God is us.
Right.
The gods that were guiding us, the gods that were telling us, etc. No, there's no gods. The gods is us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you're traveling from science to metaphysics to the point where that you're told it all depends on you.
Right.
So
right.
It's
and
like a perfect circle, right?
Right. And you can say that there is no God, the God is us, or there is no us and it's all God. It's the same thing from different perspectives. Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
you're right. I think that was the movie was saying is doesn't matter the perspective, you're the God or the God is us.
Yes.
By the end of the day, it's the same thing. That's what they're trying to say, right?
Yeah.
When you have written, all kinds of stories, from horror to the more personal stuff to more biographical to superheroes, humor, etc. How is it to switch muscles for you? Is it just instinctive, or you have to consciously focus on this is going to be another type of story? Have to put my head into it.
It is instinctive. I don't have to think about. I only recently, a few years ago, realized that back in the '80s, I was writing Justice League International and Kraven's Last Hunt at the same time. Yeah. Okay, two stories that are so diametrically opposed to each other. But for me, it's all about following the story and following the characters. It's the same process goes into a Kraven's Last Hunt that goes into a JLI.
Yeah.
It just comes out differently because the tone is different, the characters are different, and they lead you in different directions. But no, for me, it's very easy to switch up genres, and I could go from doing the very serious thing to the very silly thing and everything in between. Mm-hmm. It's natural and it's refreshing.
Mm-hmm. I am thinking that there's always one question about journey or destination, but for me, it's very clear that for you are more about the journey than the destination, right?
It is because, well, here's the fun for me. We talk about opening up that unconscious. You start with a story, you get these visions of it, you have an idea of where you want it to go. And I always say, you want to have tent poles, to guide you along the way from here to here to here to here. And again, I was talking about the same thing with my students the other day. So there's my destination over there. And I get on my horse and I go, horse, go that way. And we start galloping in that direction. Well, inevitably, the horse starts to pull in a completely different direction. And, and it takes a while to learn not to pull it back. Mm-hmm. In the beginning, you're like, no, I want to go over there. Come on, horse. And the horse is pulling there. And what you learn is you surrender to the horse, which is the story. And then it gallops off in some direction you never expected, and it surprises you, and you end up in a whole other country somewhere, And I always find the fundamental of of the story remains, but it ends up taking so many different shapes and forms, you know, and that to me is the exciting part. So it is the journey, because the journey takes you through, or to put it another way, you're walking one way and you hit a wall, but I wanted to get over there, but you can't get over that wall, so you have to walk through that door. And wow, I didn't expect this, and I've seen that not just in writing, but in terms of my career.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have these goals for yourself and you're trying to, I want to do this, this, and this, and suddenly you bump into something and you can't get there, and you end up, that's how animation started for me. I never planned this career in animation. It just sort of happened through bumping into this, or bumping, you know, knowing this person who said, do you want to try this? Well, I really never wanted to try that. Oh, I'll try. Next thing you know, it's a whole other stream of my career that's been so enjoyable for the past like 16, 17 years. But it wasn't part of the plan. It was because I bumped into something and I walked in the other direction. And those are, I always say to people, follow your dreams. They may not expect you you may not lead you where you expect to go, but they'll always lead you someplace good. So maybe where you expect to go is over there and the wall comes up and you go there. But that unexpected place may be even better than the goal that you had in mind.
Yeah. And talking about what you just said, I'm guessing that the horse could be an analogy, of you fighting your characters, right? What I mean is, you have the first arc, you have the second arc, and suddenly your characters tells you. Of course, you don't hear voices, but you know what I mean.
Well, sometimes you do. Sometimes you do.
You, no, this is not something I could do. This is not me. You cannot go past that wall. You have to go. You know, Greg Rucka told me that when he was doing one of his novels, the Atticus Kodiak novels, he had the whole novel, you know, like mapped out perfect. He finished the second arc, and suddenly all his characters turn against him, saying, no, you're not going to do that. And he fought the characters for a month, and he couldn't. And until he accepted the characters were right and changed completely the third act, he couldn't do the novel.
Yeah, that I'll address that through two things. One is, like, people talk about in the Justice League that Giffen and I did, Beetle and Booster. What a great team they were. You know, what a great, you know, comedy team they were. We never planned that. That had nothing to do with us. That had to do with those characters talking to each other. Characters have chemistry the way people have chemistry. And those characters, all of a sudden, we got them talking to each other, and it was like, oh, look at this. It wasn't in our plan. They were the ones that led us on. One of the most interesting things that ever happened to me, I mentioned this series, Abadazad, that I did with Mike Plug. And I was working on that, and it started as a comic book series for CrossGen, then we sold it as a book series to Disney later on. I was working on the third issue of the comic book series. I had the whole issue worked out. I knew exactly what I was going to do. And I started to type the story, started to write the story. And as I'm typing, the name of a character appears on my computer screen in front of me that I've never heard of before. Literally, until I typed the name, it wasn't in my head. And I typed it. Well, who is this? So I write a little bit more to see if I can figure out who this character is. I said, well, that's an interesting character, but you don't really belong in this story. I have a whole bunch of new characters I want to introduce. I have this other thing to do. So I try to get through the story, and no matter what I do, this story is completely falling apart. And this other little character that I've never heard of is over in the corner going, I really need to be in this story. Well, maybe I'll bring you in a little bit later, okay? I'll put you in, but not till later, because I have to do this. The only way the story worked was when this character that I had never heard of before, I don't know where it appeared from, I brought him into the story. The whole story unfolded perfectly. And I always say, who wrote that story? I don't know if I wrote that story. Somebody wrote it, and I typed it, but I don't know where it came from. Where did that character come from? It's a great feeling.
For you as a musician, also aside of a writer, do you feel comics storytelling is more a symphony, prog rock, or jazz?
Let me think about that, because as a musician, I do think about writing in very musical terms. But I'm more sort of traditional rock and roll, you know? So I'll hear it, I'll see it more in terms of a Beatles song or something, you know? But, you know, it's interesting because we work in these little captions, you know? Words in these little captions, and one caption leads to another caption, leads to another caption, leads to another, with a very specific, I hear a real drum beat. There's a real specific rhythm and drum beat, or and you know, the art is maybe playing one melody, and the words are playing another melody. Certain aspects or images that repeat can become a drum beat. It becomes like, to me, it becomes like a band. It's like four guys playing together, and all these different parts come together, but it's very musical to me. It's very poetic. I think there's a big link between writing for comics and writing poetry and writing song lyrics, because we're writing, even if it goes on for 22 pages or 64 pages or 100 pages, we're writing in these little boxes. And each little box really has to have its own life before you get to the next one, and its own rhythm and its own tone, and they have to hook into each other and then hook into the next page. And the way that words play off against pictures, you know, is like, you know, the guitar playing off against the bass or something. You know what I mean? They're all playing, and you put it all together, and it becomes this song. And it's really, it's a great thing. There's I think as a musician, it's easy to kind of see all the arts through a musical lens in some way.
Yes, yes. And don't you think it's also very mathematical? I think because music is also math.
Right. But you know, I don't have a brain that thinks mathematically. That part of my brain, I lost that brain.
That's what I was trying to say. We don't, but in the end, everything is math, even if we don't realize it, because everything is, you know, this has to have a rhythm. And the rhythm, as I said, math is the language of reality.
Yeah, I never thought about that. I'll have to think about that, because it's so, the mathematics is so divorced from my reality and the functioning of my brain that I'm still counting on my fingers. You know what I mean?
No, but
I hear what you're saying, though. I do.
I always think about, you know, back in the old days where they were called schools of arts and sciences. So it was all, you know, a lot more related to this now.
Right.
Math was a part of poetry. It was a part of music. It was a part of every type of creation, because it's all measured, you know, a symphony, you know, Bach, Beethoven, etc. You see the pace, and the pace is really, really mathematical. And I think it applies to all arts in the end. We don't understand math, but we move through math, through math, whether we like it or not. That's what I was trying to say. What is for you the most unique part of the comics language, of comics storytelling, as related to other art forms? What that you have played with, you know, like in animation, etc.
You know, what I really like about it is that it can be so many different things. You know, there's a certain school of thought that used to say comic books are movies on paper, which I never bought that. I don't believe that for a second. They can be that, but they can be so much else. It's all about the choice you make in that storytelling. You know, comics. I love exploring the wall between comics and prose. A lot of my stuff, as you know, gets very prose heavy. I might want to stop the story for 3 pages and have one illustration and a length of prose on that page, and then maybe do 4 pages where it's just images moving and no words. I mean, you can do anything with comics. You can mix and match and bring in poetry and music and prose and you know, the visual arts in so many ways. So comics are kind of infinite in what you can do with that combination of words and pictures. And it's almost like you just take words and pictures, you put them in a pile, you put a stick of dynamite in there, light it up and blow it up, and it can be, you know, wherever it lands is a comic book. I remember years ago when I was doing Moonshadow, which was really the first series that helped me as a writer to really find my voice and step outside of that Marvel DC mindset and just write. And I worked with a brilliant artist named John J. Muth. And people would say to me, "But this is really great, but it's not a comic book." To which my answer is, if I say it's a comic book, it's a comic book, you know? You put those words and pictures on the page, and whatever you choose to do with them, however you choose to tell that story, whatever narrative point of view, whatever visual games you want to play, however you want to do it, if it's words and pictures, it's a comic book, and it's infinite.
Absolutely, but because when I hear about, oh, that's that typical phrase, oh, that's not a comic, I always go back and say, okay, tell me what's the limit. Tell me why it's not. And they can find it. And I was with Scott McCloud like 3 hours, like a month ago, and he was, you know, structured and telling me in the points on my screen, oh, this is the formalist, this is this and this and that. And by the end, I was like, but my question is, do comics have any limits in terms of storytelling, in terms of format, in terms of length, in terms of the way you want to tell a story? And the conclusion was, no, it doesn't. It's the only art form that doesn't have any limits. You can play with it any way you want, and it'll work.
Yeah, and you know, comics also has something in common with, give me a minute to explain this, with radio. I'm a big fan of like the old radio from the 40s and the 50s and radio dramas and radio comedies, because in radio you had the sound, but what filled everything else in was the listener's imagination.
Yes.
On the comic book page, it's hard to realize these are just very static images. It's a panel and somebody's doing that. You know what I mean? We don't see it that way when we're reading it. Our imagination is brought to bear on that, and we create the movement between panels. We create the voices of the characters in our head. My Batman voice is not your Batman voice. You know what I mean? So there is a real reader participation part too. So you have this limitless art form, and yet it's not complete until the reader picks it up and creates that very specific movie in his or her own mind. Because everybody who picks up a comic is creating their movie.
Yes.
And your movie is not my movie. It's
Yes.
not his movie or her movie. Everybody's movie is different, even though it's the same stuff on the page.
Mm-hmm. And that takes me to another really important part that people doesn't tend to measure as important in comics, but for me it's one of the three most important things, and we'll get to the other two later, which is pattern recognition.
Explain.
Pattern recognition, you know, when we were in the caves, we were cavemen, you hear the bush rustling. Shit, there's probably an animal there. Run, it's going to kill you.
Right.
We kept that to this day. You know, we don't need the whole line to be completed or the whole phrase to be said in comics.
Right.
Comics,
Right.
You know, movies need to tell you the whole thing. You know, novel needs to explain the whole thing. But in comics, you don't. You just recognize the pattern, and you feel it. That's part of what you just said. Reader participation in comics are important because we leave a space for them. You know, we don't give them, some artists do, of course, but you don't need to see the whole Batman suit. You just don't. You just do this, and you know that's Batman cape.
You know, I was literally just today, I happened to pick up an old issue of the Jack Kirby Collector, and there was a panel he had done with Alex Toth. And Toth was talking about the fact how the first half of his career was all about taking every influence in and learning and putting it all in his art. And the second half was all about deciding what to leave out. And he talked about this very idea that the more he left out, the more room there was for the reader to participate. And I thought that was it was beautiful. It was really beautifully said, but it's true. You know, I remember at the very beginning of my career, one of the first gigs I had at Marvel was writing Conan, and John Buscema was drawing it. But he was just working in breakdowns, really simple breakdowns. But if you looked at those breakdowns, it was all there. It was everything you needed to know in terms of storytelling and emotion was there in these incredibly simple breakdowns, you know. And then I think Bob McLeod would come along and do a beautiful job of filling all that out. But it's amazing, you know, simplicity is very hard to achieve.
Yeah. Very
hard to achieve. You know, people hear the word simple and somehow I think in their mind they think it's somehow, I don't know, they get it mixed up maybe with simple-minded or something. I don't know. But simplicity in art is hopefully what we're all moving toward. And kind of what Alex Toth was talking about. You know, what do you strip away and what do you leave in? And how can I communicate this in the clearest, simplest way possible? Yeah,
stripping lines takes many years. I always put the example of, you know, Jaime Hernandez, Love from Love and Rockets. You see his evolution over the years. And he was so ahead of his time, and still is. But stripping lines, it's always been about getting to the simplest line that tells you the story in the most profound and deep way.
Yes.
And direct, because there's nothing that is extra. There's no extra baggage. There's no extra weight. Everything is there, and he's telling you, this is what you need to go. This is what you need. Your eyes needs to go there.
Yes. Yeah. And it's true in writing too. You know, the more that you can create an echo between the words, it's almost like each word should be, and it echoes. And within the echoes is more story. There's a Swedish writer that when I was younger, I read all his books. His name is Per Lagerkvist. He wrote Barabbas, The Sibyl, Pilgrim's to Sea, a lot of wonderful books. And I watched as you read his books as his style simplified and simplified, so that each word had every word had these echoes around it. You know what I mean? And the writing was very simple and clear, and yet that you could go through the spaces between the words into the depths of that story. The spaces between the words led you deeper and deeper into that story, and it's not easy to do. And I've attempted it at various points with different stories. When we did the sequel to Moonshadow, we did something called Farewell Moonshadow, and Dark Horse just collected the whole thing last year in a beautiful edition, which I think is being reprinted all around the world. So I'm very happy. And we decided we didn't want to do it the same way we had done the first series. We wanted to do it in a different way to challenge ourselves. So it started with me writing a prose piece. And that's what I tried to do with that prose piece, so that each page of prose had that simplicity, had a completion to it that yet led you to the next page of prose. But I was looking for that. I think to this day, I think it's some of the best writing I've ever done. To try to achieve that simplicity, but that simplicity with a poetry to it that opens up those other levels and layers between the words, And the fun of working on that project was then we would have the prose, and John J. Muth would do an illustration to go with each page. And then we'd have a sequence that would be 3 or 4 pages of just pure comics with no words, just images, panel to panel to panel, and then back to prose and illustration. It's one of my favorite things I've ever done. Yeah.
By the way, this morning I was watching a trailer of a new TV show in Apple TV Plus named Stillwater, and after 19 seconds I read, based on the books on the children's books created by John J. Muth.
Oh, that's right. Yes. Oh, the trailer's out. Oh, that's great.
The trailer's out, and I think they're releasing it next month. And I was really excited because I never knew they were adapting the books. And when I said, "Oh wait, Apple is doing this, I need to watch it." So it was the trailer is out already, and it looks
fantastic.
Amazing. And it looks amazing.
Yeah, we're still friends, and we get together periodically. So I've known about this for a long time. So I'm very excited that it's finally out in the world, and I hope he has great success with it. He's had a fantastic career working in children's books for the past probably 15 or 20 years.
Well, good for you, right? As we said before, you don't want to have all your eggs in the same basket.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
What is it for you? To move out of when you move out of superheroes to your own creator, own stuff, does it change the focus? I mean, for example, some writers are focused on structure, some others are focused on emotion. When they start writing a story, the focus of what I want to achieve, what I want to focus is this or that. Does that change for you at all when you're writing different type of stories, or is it the same at all times?
Story is story, and regardless if I'm channeling that story through pre-existing characters or creating a universe of my own, there's certain basic elements to telling a story that are the same. The difference when I'm working on a creator-owned book is that there's a sense of limitlessness there, because I'm starting. To go back to before, you become God in that moment, and let's create the heavens and the earth, and let's create the characters, and let's create the world, and there's a great sense of freedom and exhilaration to that. And there are no limitations, and there's no one to tell you what to do and what not to do, which could be a scary thing too, because now it's all on me. I could fail spectacularly, but I think that's the difference. But story is story, whether I'm trying to channel it through an animated TV show or an animated movie, or through a live action TV show, or through a novel, or through a comic book. The difference with I guess when you're working on these pre-existing characters is kind of what we were talking about before. You're in that room. You're writing a Batman story. Well, Batman's been around for 80 years, 85 years? I'm not, something crazy like that. And how many hundreds, thousands of stories have been told about Batman? And there are these editors that are in charge of this character who are going to decide what you can do and what you can't do, and how far you can push it and how far you can bend it. So you can't really get out of the room. But what I learned over the years is, okay, I can't get out, but I can dig deeper. So I always feel like the challenge with those characters is to start to you may be like, it may be so constricting it feels like a cage, but you can always dig down into the character's mind and heart and try to find something new. I tell my students, peel off the top of the character's head, get out your flashlight, and go dig around and look for that corner of his or her psyche that hasn't been explored before. And that will be the door into story. And for me, character is 9 out of 10 times the door into the story. Sometimes you get this idea, it's just all concept. But even if you have the most brilliant concept in the world, if you don't attach it to the right characters, it doesn't matter. Or you think you have a great, well, what is Spider-Man? Think of that. Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, whoever we so much confusion, who came up with it. Let's say Stan came up with it. A kid gets bitten by a radioactive spider and he gets powers and he can climb a wall. Big deal. Really, that book could have come and gone in 3 months. It's what they did with that and the character that they created to inhabit that idea that has made that character last, because Peter Parker evolved into one of the most interesting characters and deepest and most human characters mainstream comics has ever seen. Yeah. If it was just, somebody else could have taken that idea and done Spider-Man, and that we wouldn't be talking about it today. You wouldn't have been talking about it 6 months later. So it has to be about the characters. The characters have to lead you through the story. I know there are some people who really just get off on like certain mystery novels that are all plot and the kind of cardboard characters that walk through it. And that's fine. If that's what you're into, that's great. I don't knock it. But that's not me. I really need to be invested in the characters as a reader and especially as a writer, because, for me, writing is first and foremost, it's like therapy. I get to get all my demons out in the story, my demons and my angels, my highest self and my lowest self. Mm-hmm. It all comes out in the story. And then what I hope is that, because I know as a reader, I'm a very passionate reader. When I find a writer whose work I love, I really take it into my heart and it really means something to me. And I carry that with me through the rest of my life. And so as the next thing for me, after I'm writing for myself, I'm writing for some reader out there who reads stories the way that I do, that I hope at least some of my stories will enter their heart and they will carry that with them. Mm-hmm. And then maybe they'll write some stories and pass that on to the next one and on and on and on, Yeah.
How does all of this you just mentioned apply to writing villains or writing about evil? How do you peel those layers? Does it feel uncomfortable at all to get deep into that mindset?
To be a writer, one must be shameless, and one must also be unafraid to dig into one's own psyche. Now I don't know whether it's people who are naturally this way then become a writer as a way to deal with that, or whether as a writer you learn to do that. I don't know which comes first. But we all have the angel and the demon inside us. We all have so many layers and levels of our humanity. And we may not act out these things like, the serial killer in the story or the Red Skull or whoever it may be. But in order to really be able to write that villain, you have to have that somewhere inside you, even if it's this much and you exaggerate it to this much. You need to be unafraid to look inside yourself and take a journey into the darker waters of your own psyche to write the villains. But the other thing is, for me, is that it's also, and I only came to realize this recently, writing the villains for me is an exercise in compassion. Because in order to really write a villain, and you put it in quotes, a villain well, you have to understand them. Mm-hmm. You have to see them not as a villain. When a villain is just a villain who's twirling his mustache saying, yeah, ha, ha, and doing terrible things, that's a horrible character. Yes. That's with very, very rare exceptions, that's a completely uninteresting character. So, to go back to something like Kraven, it was like, all right, so here's this silly little guy who's been running around in Spider-Man comics for however many years it was. Well, why does he do that? What is his motivation? What's his backstory? What the hell did his father do to him? What did his mother do? Why did he end up that way? And so then you write about him not as a villain, but as a complex person who's made certain choices because of things that have happened to him in his life. And what I realized is, by writing these villains in a fictional world, it helps us to relate to and understand people out here in the real world too. Because, now more than ever, we're so polarized, them versus us. They're the villains, we're the good guys. We're the villains, they're the good guys, So, we all need to cultivate compassion, I think, now more than ever. The older I get, the more I see that compassion is the single most important thing that we can cultivate in our lives. And I only realized in recent years that part of that is writing a good villain is also an exercise in compassion and seeing them through the lens of compassion and understanding, even if you oppose that thing, and sometimes you have to oppose it, but if you can have compassion for that which you oppose, it's not an easy thing, but it's an important thing,
But it also makes them much more interesting characters. I mean,
yes.
I never cared about Magneto until Chris started playing with that duality,
Yes.
telling us his backstory, why he became who he became, all the struggles. Then he became an interesting character.
Yes. And you said something very important, duality.
Yeah.
We all, that's everybody. We all have these forces inside us that are like this. We have opposites. And I remember being a teenager reading Dostoevsky for the first time. And, Dostoevsky's all about the duality and the opposites. And I would just read a chapter and lay on the floor in shock because it was so powerful and so true, And that's what makes an interesting character. I love the characters that are filled with opposites because whether it's in a small way or a big way, we all have those opposites inside us. And for me, the journey in life has been going from this, where you feel like they're fighting each other, to understanding that opposites can coexist and kind of float side by side, and they don't have to war with each other,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But that's what makes an interesting character to me. If there's some tug of war going on, I just, a couple of months ago, this Deathstroke movie came out, Deathstroke Knights and Dragons. And I had a sort of, I'm not interested in the sort of one-dimensional version of that character, just, the super assassin who runs around shooting people. Those kind of characters never interest me. So I was looking for, what is it here? So, and what they have in the Deathstroke mythology is that he's also got this family, this wonderfully dysfunctional family. And the tug of war in the story comes between who he thinks he is, who he presents himself to be to his family, versus who he really is. And that's the journey for him by the end of the story, to realize that the myth he's created about himself is not the truth about himself. Mm-hmm. And those kind of wars, internal wars. And then when he comes to the end of the story, I'm thinking, well, there's the sequel, because he's finally found one answer to unlock the riddle of himself. Now you can tell another story and another story and another story. But those are the things that make things interesting. I did a John Constantine movie a couple of years ago too. And what fascinates me about Constantine is that everyone says, well, Constantine's just a bastard and he's a manipulator and he's this and that. But he's not, because he's always working on the side of the light. So somewhere inside him, if he was really a bastard and manipulator, he'd be lined up with the devil the whole time, So I used his relationship with his best friend Chaz as sort of the centerpiece of this story, to see that other side of him, to show the contrast and the push and pull between that hard, cold side and between the kid that grew up in Liverpool with his best pal Chaz, and the war between those two. And that's what makes characters interesting, and that's what makes us interesting as human beings.
But also with John Constantine, and I say Constantine because Jamie Delano warned me about is Constantine. So I was like, okay, when Jamie says that, you're just sit straight.
I'm sure he's right. I've said it the other way so long. Okay. Anyway, go ahead.
We always blame him, and we always blame the movie. Oh. Because the Keanu Reeves movie called him Constantine. Right. So everybody thinks it's Constantine. So, let's just blame the movie. So we was discussing Constantine with him. And our conclusion is, he's a good guy, but the only way he has to deal with all the shit, all the demons and everything else, is a shield. The shield that he shows the world, that duality, as we said, he shows the world he's a bastard, he doesn't care, etc., etc. But in the end, do we know he's deeply in love with Satana, for example, or some other girl?
Yes.
Whatever continuity. Do we know how he cares about his niece? There's things there that tell you, in the end, he's a good guy. But to survive and to not let, those evil forces to know he has a weakness, he has to be showing he's a bastard at all times, right?
Right, exactly. One of the things I locked into when I was writing Constantine or Constantine, depending on your perspective, he's from Liverpool, right? He's this tough guy with a hard shell and a big heart, and I'm a big Beatles fan, and my brain went, oh, it's John Lennon. John Lennon could be the most cynical, hard-edged bastard on earth, and he was also the biggest idealist, you'd ever encounter, with a really big heart. Two completely opposite sides of his personality, and yet that's what made the whole man, and that's fascinating to me.
Absolutely. One last question, and then we go with the fans, because we have some questions already.
Okay, sure.
Let me explain what about the reader's superpower, and tell me if you agree. I think comics readers have a superpower that no other readers have, and that for me makes it essential that comics are teach to talk to kids from primary school. Like we are so used as readers and as creators, of course, in your case, to read between the panels, to read what happens between the panels. Superman does this, and we know the next panel is going to be Superman flying.
Right.
We don't need all that's in between, and that makes us, when we are reading, a newspaper, watching the news, watching a movie, whatever, we automatically try to read between the lines. We look for what's there that we don't see in any other art form. And that's
That's
something
very interesting.
that's
Very
the
interesting.
comics reader and creator superpower, that we always look at it from that perspective. And next time you read a newspaper or watch the news, you will realize that instinctively you are not stopping with what they tell you, what they show you. You automatically will look for what's there that they don't show you.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting, and that makes a lot of sense. You know, I am a very intuitive, instinctive person, and I also a lot of times I'm not perceiving the world on level 1. Do you know what I mean? I'm perceiving it on level 2 and 3. Sometimes level 1 confuses my brain completely. I can't make sense out of it. But I'm able to somehow penetrate beyond that and get to the essence beneath. And that's sort of what you're saying with the comic book page. That here are these static panels, but you're getting to the essence beneath that and creating that, and to take that perception out into the world. That's really a fascinating insight. I like that idea.
Yeah, it's like, when you're watching a tree, and I've tried this with people who are not comic readers. When we're watching a tree, we're thinking about how that leaf is going to move, how that branch is going to move, how the tree, because we're used to see that image of a tree with that leaf, one leaf falling in a panel, and our brain is completing the movement. We are
Right.
seeing, even if that leaf is static in the panel and you see the tree like here, our brain as comic readers is making the move.
Right.
We
Right.
feel it. Even if there's no gap between panels, it's just in the same panel, we make the movement, right?
And what's interesting too is that there are lots of people that just cannot, really, really smart people who cannot understand the language of a comic book page. It completely baffles them. I know people like that, where you have to literally sit down and say, no, you look at this balloon and this balloon and this balloon, and then you go to this here and this there. And yet for those of us that read this, it's natural. We don't even think about it. And I think about the fact for me too, that as a kid in school, I had learning disabilities. I struggled with a lot of things as a kid. And yet the comic book language, I always understood in some deep intuitive way, and other people, it has something to do with the wiring of our brains, that we intuitively and instinctively respond to that form of storytelling. We know just where to look. We know how to fill in the gaps between those panels, and create that movie, whereas someone else, and I know how someone else would feel looking at a comic book page, because of my own limitations of my brain. Like, I have a hard time reading maps. If I look at a map, it's just like a bunch of crazy lines that are giving me a headache, and I really cannot perceive the map the way that someone else could. And I think for some people, looking at a comic book page is that it overwhelms their brain. They can't understand it. And yet we have, for whatever reason, because of the wiring in our own brains, we understand that language and we flow with it and we fill in those gaps. And it's a fascinating thing, just the language of comics and the people that can understand that language and the people that can't.
Yeah, and when you start reading, the first things you read outside of children's tales is comics, then it becomes so easy for you to understand the other languages, because
Right.
comics have the perfect blend of image and text. It's like you're guided from the image to the text and guided from the text to the image. It's that synergy that's created that for you, I guess, the same. I always say the same thing. In your case with John J. Muth or with Kevin and Keith, you create another person, right? You're doing your job. It's not you, Keith, and Kevin, or you and John J. It's suddenly you realize that what comes out is neither you nor him. It's something that a third entity has created, right?
Well, to take it to the musical thing again, it's like being in a band. It's like, I'll take it to the Beatles again because I'm obsessed with the Beatles. Here are 4 really, really, really talented guys individually, great stuff. But something happened when you put those 4 together that created this magic, this chemistry, and this energy that could not have existed had the 4 of them not been in the same room together. Talk about me and Keith working together, and we were always working separately. He wrote the plot, I wrote the script. We in the beginning we hardly even talked to each other. But you can have incredible chemistry on the page without having chemistry out here in the so-called real world. And I've seen the opposite. I've written a great story. Someone's done a great job in the art. You put it together on the page, and it's awful. Somehow, just the way there's chemistry between people, you meet somebody, you instantly click with them. There's chemistry between writers and artists, between pencilers and inkers, whatever, And if you don't have that chemistry, it doesn't matter how talented the people are, it's not going to work.
Absolutely. And as a musician and also writer, have you ever thought of colors as sounds?
No, my brain doesn't work that way. No, it doesn't. I know that there are people that literally hear sound when they see color, and each color has different sound, but my brain does not go there.
Okay, let's see. Let's go with people here. Oh no, one last question. Who do you think made the best post-Beatles solo album of the four?
I'm a hardcore John Lennon fan, so I'm always going to go with Lennon. John Lennon Plastic Ono Band, which was his first post-Beatles album, is one of the greatest albums ever made by anybody. And then so many other great albums, but I'm also a really big fan of an album he did called Walls and Bridges, which I think is just a really incredible, underrated album. So I've loved all their solo music, but Lennon stuff, I tend to, I'm into character and duality and all those things in my stories. I like that in my music too. And Lennon's solo stuff is like a musical autobiography, and it's all about the war going on inside him.
Yes.
The idealist and the cynic constantly at war, so I really respond to that. And he had one of the most emotional voices in the history of rock and roll. He can just sing 3 words and you feel his heart and soul in it. And I've always responded to that.
Yeah, and he could hate and love Paul in the same song in 10 seconds, depending on the move that he had.
Exactly. Not, but again, I like Paul. I adore Paul McCartney. I always say that preferring John Lennon to Paul McCartney is like preferring breathing to the beating of my heart. You know what I mean? You need them both. So I may have a preference, but I love them both.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to be different here, I have always loved All Things Must Pass as the best.
Great album.
As the best post-Beatle album. And I love everything Paul did with Wings, and I love John, but probably because of the surprise from my older brothers. I'm the fifth of 5. When my older brother bought All Things Must Pass and listened, this is George Harrison? And of course, I didn't know how talented he was until then.
Right.
Wait. So he wasn't just the guy who could play the guitar very well. He was another really talented guy who couldn't shine because he had God and demigod together.
Right, exactly. Yeah, he could have left the Beatles in 1966 and started his own band and been a hit on his own,
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's amazing that much talent assembled in one place from four kids, working class kids from Liverpool. Amazing.
Absolutely. Okay, let's go with people here. Luis P. Videos, hello. Rita Carambola, hi. Eek, okay. Paola Ventimiglia, hello. Giuseppe, ciao. David and JM from Italy, hello. Locke from Howard, hi. Let me see. Locke from Howard, he says from YouTube, a lot of times it's been said that Kraven's Last Hunt didn't fit as a Spider-Man, as a Spider-Man story, but it should have really been a Batman story, which I don't agree with. What do you think of that?
I don't agree with it either. It almost was a Batman story in its earlier incarnation. I pitched it to DC and for a variety of reasons didn't get there. Because the story is very much a Kraven story. It's a Kraven-centric story, and Kraven is a Spider-Man villain, and it was taking the Spider-Man villain who'd been around for years and illuminating him in a whole new way. And B, as we were saying before, to me, Peter Parker is one of the most layered, nuanced, interesting characters in mainstream comics. He feels so real to me. I've written him so much as getting into the where's imagination, where's reality. Peter's a real person to me. I feel like he's an old friend that I know very well. And that story was very, very much important to him. In fact, one of the things that made that story work was the urgency and the coincidence of the fact that he'd just gotten married. And this whole crawl through the darkness to get back to the woman that he loved was so important to that character. Now, I could have done it as a Batman story, but the emphasis would have been very different because Bruce Wayne isn't the same character. That's where we talk about, well, you can take an idea. What do you do with that idea? That idea expressed through Batman could be very, very different than that idea expressed through Peter Parker. So I did a version of that, because originally when I pitched it to DC at first, the idea was that the Joker was going to kill Batman or think he killed Batman, and his mind was going to snap because he had achieved his goal. So his mind snapped and he goes sane. And so about 10 years after, or 15 years after I did Kraven's Last Hunt, I did a story for Legends of the Dark Knight called Going Sane. So if you want to see how a story like that would play out with Batman, that's the story to look at. So it follows the Joker as he into his new life as a, quote, sane person, and the journey that Batman takes recovering from his, quote, death. But it's a very different story than Kraven's Last Hunt, even though it plays with the same themes because we're dealing with different characters in different worlds. But I think that was at the time, I think people reacted that way because it was a darker Spider-Man story that had never been done before. But it was very much a Spider-Man story. You know, I know Peter Parker, and I know that world, and that was very much a Spider-Man story.
No, it was. I don't agree with that at all either, because you kind of. I'm sorry. I don't think you can do the story with Batman at all. You know, you don't have the urge to come back to his wife. You don't have Peter's struggle and weakness. You know, in a way, imposter syndrome. You know, that self-doubt. Batman would never have that.
Yeah, you have to find a different road for Batman through that. A different road up out of the grave.
Absolutely. Yeah. Rita Carambola, question about the New Defenders. Although it was in a Peter Gillis issue that Cloud was revealed as a man by woman, did you have this idea in mind when you created the character? Was you thinking in trans people, bi people, LGBTI people in general? None of this? What was your intention about this?
I'm trying to think back. I'm pretty sure that, you know, when I created the character, I do not think that was part of it. But I also remember that I wrote up a whole document that I gave to Peter. I don't know whether that was suggested in there, but I'll give all the credit to Peter Gillis on that. I don't think with that particular character that was the plan, because I left the book not long after I introduced that character, and then Peter came along and developed that character. So I think I'll give the credit to Peter on that one.
Okay. Bernardo Alonso Pozo, also from YouTube. Hi, I just want to thank JM, Spectacular Spider-Man 191-193, saved my life and gave me hope when I was down a long time ago. So thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Oh, you're very welcome. Now I'm trying to remember which storyline that was.
Bernardo, please help. I don't remember. It's been too long. I'm sorry.
I'm trying to figure out, was that must have been the Child Within storyline, perhaps? Maybe if that was that.
I'm just gonna Google it. Spectacular.
Yeah, let's Google it so I can answer this.
191. Let me see. Only one Marvel database. I just want to see the cover. My comic shop.
I'm looking too.
It's Puma's. The 191 is the title is Puma's Rage.
Oh, that's the Black Crow story.
Yes, Eye of the Puma Part 1.
Yes, that was Puma and Black Crow that dealt with a whole lot of Native American mysticism in that story. Wow, so not a lot of people have brought that story up to me. That's that run with Sal Buscema, those 2 years, I consider some of the best work I've ever done in mainstream comics. Working with Sal was a dream come true.
Did you ever have to run to keep with Sal's pace?
No, you know, it was one of the, we were talking before about chemistry between writer and artist. And it was like from the first page, the first panel, the two of us clicked and we were just off. And it was just magic. It was just magic. And, you know, the added bonus is that Sal is just a really, really good person and just a pleasure to talk to on the phone and collaborate with. But it just clicked, and you can't make it click. It just did. And those 2 years, especially that whole Harry Osborn saga that wove through those two years, I think is some of the best stuff I've done in mainstream comics anyway. And if that story helps some, and that's what I mean. We're talking about when you go to a convention and someone comes up to you and says, that story really helped me through a difficult time in my life. Wow. I mean, what more could you ask? That you know, I feel like the stories are almost like paper airplanes when we're done with them, and we sail them out the window. We don't know where they're going to go, who's going to find them, what's going to happen when they unfold them and read what we've written on them. You know, so when someone says something like that, it means a lot to me. So thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, so Mandalorian FL21. Hello, Mr. DeMATTEIS. It's a pleasure to have you here today. Rita Carambola says, appreciation about long shot, one shot fools. I think you did a great, sensitive job. You got to understand a character a few writers, I think, comprehend, and you wrote him as the vagabond he is, a sacred tramp.
Oh, thank you. That was, there are certain stories that I've done that people talk about and are very well known, and there are other stories that I might have loved working on, and they go out, and it's like you never hear anything about it. Longshot is one of those, and I got to work with Michael Zulli, who everyone I think knows from his work on Sandman and so many other amazing things, and it was really sort of taking this Marvel character and doing it like it was a Vertigo book for this one shot, and he's sort of the holy fool, the innocent, and the whole story was about that. Really, it was a whole cast of these innocents, and it was really a fun book to work on. And Zuli did a fantastic job on it. So thank you for mentioning that one, because I don't hear about it very much. So it's nice to know that someone read it and enjoyed it and got it. You know.
Okay, Leonardo Torres, also from YouTube, says, a great legend. The Justice League that Giffen and DeMATTEIS created deserves a superhero sitcom. Thanks a lot for the laughs.
Yeah, Keith always used to say that if you're going to do our Justice League as a TV show, it should be a sitcom, and it should all take place in JLI headquarters. All the battles take place off screen, and it's them when they come back, and it's all their interactions week to week. And I always thought that was a brilliant idea, because it's all based in character. Really, the whole thing that made that series work, whether they were having giant moments fighting villains or ridiculous moments just hanging out together, it was all about those characters, and that's why I think it would work really well. I'm surprised no one has done a JLI series or a movie. When I was working on the Batman Brave and the Bold animated series, I wrote a few episodes that had the JLI, and the buzz was that they were going to transition from Batman the Brave and the Bold to a JLI series. And it almost happened, but clearly it didn't happen. But I thought that would have been great, an ongoing animated JLI series.
Yes. I hope that somebody with HBO Max realizes they need to do it, because they need to do it. I completely agree.
And I'm very happy to write it.
and would be really happy to see you write it. Luck from Howard, how did you come up with the crossover between Spider-Man and Batman with Mark Bagley? I love that one.
Yeah, that was great. I actually did two of those. I did one for Marvel, the Batman Spider-Man with Mark Bagley, and then I did a Batman Spider-Man for DC with Graham Nolan on the art. So, there are times writing, like anything else, can become a career, can become a grind. You get overwhelmed by the stresses of whatever it is. And the thing that always helps me to get through that is when I take a half step back and talk to the little 10-year-old inside my head and tell him what I'm doing. So for that 10-year-old to be handed a project teaming up Spider-Man and Batman, what you know what I mean? That little comic fan in my heart. Oh my God, what a thrill that was, And then to get to do it twice.
Yes,
it was just amazing. So yeah, and I don't know if they've done any Batman Spider-Man team ups since then, since those two. So I feel very lucky that I got to work on both those series and to work with two great artists on it. And they were very different stories too, because the first one had I think it was Carnage and the Joker, and the second one was the Kingpin and Ra's al Ghul. Mm-hmm. So they're very different tone to each story. And so I had a great time working on both of those, and I felt very privileged that I got the chance to put those two characters together and play with them that way. Yeah,
and as you just said, you have Kingpin and Ra's al Ghul, which is down to earth in a way.
Yes.
And if you have Carnage in the other side, it's got to be completely different stories, right?
Yes.
Because the tone's got to be more down to earth in a way, and the other's got to be a lot more fantastic superheroic.
Yes, exactly. And it was just a lot of fun.
Okay. El Descampado asks you, do you think any act of creation needs a bit of pain and anxiety?
That's a great question, because there's this whole shtick about, that the artist must suffer for his art, and sometimes that's true, and sometimes the art is actually the release for suffering that has nothing to do with your art. You go through suffering in your life, and the way you express it is through your art, and that becomes your therapy. But I don't, I tell my writing classes that everything I'm about to tell you is true except when it's not. And I think that's true of life. So yes, is suffering part of creating great art? It is, except when it isn't. Why can't great art come out of your joy as well as your suffering? So I think sometimes creative people get attached to that idea. The idea of like suffering for my art. I have to be on the floor of my office, banging my head against the floor and screaming and pulling out whatever hair I have left. And you know what I mean? It's like, it doesn't have to be that way. And as we know, when we were talking earlier about that, the moment when the movie starts in your head and suddenly this idea appears from another dimension and you just jump in and you follow it, that comes from a place of joy, not a place of struggle or suffering, And it's like anything else, every story you have a point where you feel like something's not working and you have to, I always, for whatever reason, I always think of it in terms of like lengths of pipe and plumbing, where like, I'm supposed to put these two pieces of pipe together, and they're not working. And I have to, oh my God, I have to take all the pipe apart, go buy new pipe, put it back together. So there's always going to be that aspect to anything, because that's life, because there's always that aspect to life. But the idea that we have to suffer for our art, that great art only comes out of suffering, no, I don't believe that.
Yeah, so, as I always say, suffering for your art is overrated.
Yes, absolutely.
What is the problem? Some artists, and I've had these big arguments with them, some artists, as I think you were saying too, like, oh, if you don't suffer it doesn't work. No, that's not true. You can be enjoying it yourself and saying, oh my God, I'm loving what I'm doing.
Yes, I actually wrote a song that had that exact. I wrote a song that had that exact line. Stuff it was about this, because same thing with people that are on the spiritual path. They think you can only get to God through suffering, and the line of the song was, "Suffering is overrated as a path to God." Suffering is overrated as a path to everything.
Absolutely.
Maybe that's been true till now, but why does it have to be true from this moment forth in your life? Why can't you change that?
Yeah, and we are not in the 10th or 15th century. We are in the 21st century. Sometimes you gotta adapt and see what you have around you. And maybe what you have around you means that you can enjoy your art. You don't have to suffer because, you work for the king, and if he doesn't like that art, maybe he's going to fucking chop your head off.
Right.
So maybe you have to suffer for your art because you're thinking, if he doesn't like it or whatever day he farts on, he's going to kill me. This is not going to happen to you now. So
Right.
Okay, Mandalorian FL21 asks, what's the best part about writing?
I think it's what we talked about earlier, what I just referenced again. For me, the very, very best part is when I get out of the way and this magic starts coming through from another dimension, and I'm seeing movies, I'm seeing characters and stories that I've never imagined before, and I get to race to my computer and try to get this movie from my head down onto the computer. And you always hope maybe someday I'll just be able to just plug it into my head and the movie will just download. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. And of course, the great disappointment with probably for everybody is there's the story that you envision in your head, and then there's the story that makes it onto the paper and into print. And there's always going to be some sort of gap between the purity of that initial vision and what you get out there.
Mm-hmm.
At least to the person who's creating it. And to put it in musical terms, it's like you're singing in a studio, you hear your voice back on the playback, and it's like, that's not the voice I heard in my head when I was singing it. Why don't I sound like John Lennon? Why don't I sound like this one or that one? No, you sound like you. And that's another thing, a little off the topic, but you have to, at some point in your career, we all start off imitating other people. You have to, at some point, embrace your voice. Stop expecting the voice of your favorite writer to be coming out of your mouth, or your favorite singer to be coming out of your mouth, and realize the unique thing that you have to offer.
Yeah.
And that's an important part of the journey. But so for me, the fun is just when the unconscious gets uncorked and I get to see these stories coming through from another dimension makes me really happy.
Yeah. There's a great ad that we are having. I don't know if it's in the rest of the world, but Rafael Nadal, the tennis player, is a Kia sponsor or something. And there's an ad where a small kid saying, I want to be like you. I want to, do everything like you. And Nadal's answer is, don't be like me, because I was never like anybody else. That was
right. Right. And, when we all start out, whether I'm putting it in terms of music or in terms of writing or in terms of art, we're all taking in our influences. We're all imitating to some degree. That's how you learn.
Yeah.
And the important part of the journey is to filter. You reach a certain point where you're never going to get rid of those influences. You don't want to, because they're what made you who you are. But you want to filter that through your own unique perspective and find your own voice, because you don't want to just be echoing someone else's voice. They've already said it. You want your voice and your perspective.
Yeah, you don't want to be always copying from a tree that you see in a comic or an illustration. You want to go out and the tree and then create your own.
Right, exactly.
Darkside is Darkside says, thank you, Mr. DeMATTEIS. I've never get tired of reading your work on GLI, and I've recently read Batman Go Insane for the first time, which is also excellent. Rita Carambola says, magic is just the science we still do not comprehend. Yeah, that's the Arthur C. Clarke quote. Francisco Sanchez, how did a question that I'm sure you have answered like a million times. How did you guys have the idea of doing that kind of Justice League sitcom story? How did you, and also how did you pick one by one the members of the team?
Well, in terms of the tone of the series, and you know, nobody ever sat down and said like, let's do a funny superhero comic. That wasn't the plan. It all kind of happened by accident. And I give so much credit to Andy Helfer, our editor, because he's the one that picked Keith and then picked me and picked Kevin and threw us all together, which no one else probably at that point in time would have ever done. And it was just, you know, in the beginning, it was just another Justice League comic, but that chemistry thing started to happen again. And Keith, by Keith's nature, there's always going to be some humor in the story. Mm-hmm. I picked up on the humor in what Keith did, and I started building on that. He would build on what I did. Kevin, through his expressive acting on the page, created a certain tone. And we never, honestly, we never sat down and said, we're doing a superhero sitcom. That was never the plan. We were just doing another comic. And then, as we said before, the characters take over. They start talking to each other, and the tone develops. And one day we woke up and we realized what we had, but it wasn't because we planned it that way. It just happened spontaneously. As for who picked the group of characters, that was all picked before I even got on the book, because there was, I think, that Legends miniseries that came out before JLI, and I think there was a group that I don't know who decided to DC. This is who the group's going to be, and we always thank God that they gave us characters like Blue Beetle and Booster Gold, and then we would bring in characters like Fire and Ice, because it's always the second, third tier characters from a writing perspective that can be so much more interesting because you can make them your own.
Yeah.
If it had been the classic group of Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Mama, there's just so much we could have done because they all have their own books and they all have their own creative teams and editors watching over them very carefully. And you can't do that. You can't do that. By getting these other characters that were considered B-list or C-list characters gave us the freedom to make the book our own.
Mm-hmm. Let's be honest here. Who was Batman between the group of you? Who was the one who was so irritated by Guy Garner? And it's like,
between us as people?
Yeah, it's like thinking it that way. Oh, if I was Batman, this guy would be irritate me from to no end.
You know what? I got to tell you that we all really got along. We all liked and respected each other. You know?
No. I mean, you know, you're a writer. You have Batman. You have Guy in the group, and who of you felt like Batman? You know, about Guy, like this.
About the character himself.
Yeah, this is a guy who irritates me a lot, and Batman has to put him in his, you know, in his right.
You know, kind of what we were talking about before, where every character is some part of your psyche. So you have to become the annoying character and love the annoying character, and you have to become the guy who's annoyed by that character. The thing that I always related to in writing those characters it reminded me of growing up in Brooklyn, New York, with being a teenager or a young adult with my group friends, hanging out on a Saturday night, where you know how it is when you start to banter and everybody's being sarcastic with each other and playful and sometimes mean and sometimes loving, and it was real. And you know, the thing about the humor in that book, I realized looking back, is that the humor, you know, the humor makes the characters more real. Now, some people go, oh, it's a humor book, so it's not as serious as this book over here. But the humor actually adds a level of reality to the characters, because I think for all of us in our lives, sometimes the darker the situation, the more we need our humor to get through it.
And also, let me know if you agree with this. The humor makes the poignant moments more poignant. The drama is intensified because you are coming from a humorous point of view, comedic, if you want to say, and then you get to that point when you have no defense. You're not ready for it, so it's just like a stabbing.
That's exactly right. And we try to do that periodically in that book, where we'd have something very silly going on and then we'd flip it. And Keith was always very good at that in the plots, to just build it. So, you know, you have this silliness going on, and then all of a sudden something very powerful and serious and dramatic happens, and it hits you. You know, in a regular superhero comic where something serious and dramatic is happening every third page, it's not the same.
Yeah.
And it really has impact. It's like some of the classic, you know, sitcoms, you know, MASH is a great example, you know, very, very funny, and then turns on a dime into something very, very serious. And I've always liked comedies that are able to do that are able to like really, really make you laugh in the most absurd ways, and then completely break your heart a moment later. And it's a great skill, because isn't that what life is?
Yeah.
You're ricocheting between all those things constantly.
And also, that's something that I keep repeating about superhero comics lately, and some other eras too, which is sometimes I miss writers realizing the true value of silence. Sometimes you're like intensity, 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 20 pages. Like, no, I need a second. I need a second of silence, of reflection. So,
Right.
I can absorb everything. If you don't give me that moment, there's going to be a time when everything is so intense, I don't care.
If every song you play, the amplifier is turned to 10, you're just going to go deaf.
Yeah.
Right. You need a nice little acoustic number, and then you crank it up again,
And that's what I meant before about the symphony. Sometimes you're in the
Yes.
high, sometimes
Yes.
you're low, and that's part of storytelling. If you are always
Yes.
here, I, as a reader, I'm not going to care.
Yeah.
I need my, as a man would say, I need my moments.
It's true. It's
Anyway,
true.
Rita Carambola said, I love the way you think right after this conversation. I'm going to go to my yoga session, and I bet it's going to be great. Germán Ample Duran tells you, I'm reading Moonshadow right now, and I'm enjoying it like a pig on a mud, whatever it's called. Where pigs jump on the mud,
Okay.
I don't know how to translate it to English.
No, you got it.
Okay. Rita Carambola says, Claremont used to say that the X-Men act for themselves, the characters act for themselves, that he was surprised of what happened in the comic, that sometimes it wasn't his intention.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And those are the moments that make this the most fun.
Mm-hmm. Says Germán Ample tells you, Kraven was never just Spider-Man's arch nemesis until you gave him, a turn of the wheel with Last Hunt. What do you think a good villain must have, and which ones of the ones you've written are your or not written are your favorites?
Yeah, I think in general, kind of what we talked about earlier, you need complexity. You need a villain that you can feel, that you could see the fullness of their humanity, that they're not just one-dimensional. Every once in a while, a one-dimensional villain is really fun. I mean, the Red Skull is sort of a one-dimensional character. But even when I wrote Captain America, I did an issue that was all a backstory about the Red Skull and how he came to be the Red Skull. And you saw what his childhood was, and you saw what turned him into this force of evil. It's very rare that a one-dimensional villain is going to be an interesting villain. And as for favorites, that's a good question. That's a really good question. With the villains, I really like the Spider-Man villains. I enjoyed writing Dr. Octopus. I enjoyed writing Kraven. My favorite, probably the Harry Osborn Green Goblin, because that was a fantastic relationship from a writing point of view. They're best friends. They love each other. And that never changed. Even when they were mortal enemies and hated each other, they were still best friends and loved each other. And there you have enough soil for you could plant the seeds of 1,000 stories right there. So I think probably if I was going to pick my absolute favorite hero villain dynamic that I ever wrote, it was probably Peter and Harry.
Andres Guinaldo, your artist on Justice League Dark, says, hi, JM.
Hey!
JM is one of the best writers I've ever worked with.
Thank you.
Justice League Dark was amazing. One of my best times in DC.
Oh, thank you. I hope that we can do it again someday. It was, and what was great about Andre was watching him evolve from issue to issue. That's really the fun. And with artists, you can literally see it. You know what I mean? As they stretch and as they grow and they master their craft, and from issue to issue, it was a really fun collaboration. And I hope we get to do it again. Thank you so much for saying that.
And another one of your collaborators, Fernando Blanco.
Fernando,
happy to be listening to you, Mark. You're a true comic legend. Very proud of our Phantom Stranger.
I feel exactly the same way. And I've been seeing his work too. Talk about growth. He did terrific work when we were doing Phantom Stranger. The stuff he's doing now, off the charts, he's so talented. So again, that's one of the great things about being in this business is getting to work with these amazing artists. Because, the story is the foundation. But let's face it, when you pick up a comic book, the first thing you're going to respond to is the art. And if you're in a store and you're flipping through it and the art doesn't grab your eye, the story can't grab your eye. The art has to grab your eye. And I've been so lucky to work with so many amazing artists over the years. And there were two of them right there. So I never take that for granted. I'm so grateful that I've had so many wonderful collaborators. So thank you both.
Yes. Rita Carambola tells you, the great thing about comics is that they are objectively static, but they grew live through millions of ellipses of many kinds.
Yes. Through the medium of our imagination, they become
Exactly.
alive. Yeah.
Exactly. You know, we fill in the gaps. It's our imagination that fills in.
Yep.
Germana Pleduran tells you have a long career with many masterpieces under your belt. But is there anything you haven't done yet and you would like to do?
That's a good question. Let me think about that. You know, there are always characters that I would like to return to, that I've written before, or a few that I haven't written. But really, the fun of it is there's always something else. That hill you talked about earlier, getting over the hill, there's always something over the hill.
Yeah.
And there's so many times when, you know, over the years where I think, well, I guess I'm done. I don't really have anything else to say in comics. And then here comes some idea. And I've got to write this, and it's perfect as a comic book. I have to do this. So really, that's the thing that keeps pulling me on. It's the next thing more than the thing that I've done. Although, again, I would love to return to certain characters that I love. I love the DC supernatural characters. Fernando was talking about Phantom Stranger. Andre was talking about Justice League Dark. What a wonderful corner of the DC universe. I love it. I would go back there anytime. Same thing at DC Marvel with Doctor Strange as a character that I love. I've written the Silver Surfer, but I love the Silver Surfer. I always thought that me, Giffen, and Maguire doing Fantastic Four would be a blast.
Oh, yes.
But the new story, that's the one that has not been told before, with brand new characters that pop out of my head. That's the thing that matters the most to me.
It's the compulsion to write, right?
Yeah, and I'm compelled to write by the stories and characters themselves.
Yes.
Yeah.
Arita goes back to Longshot before. He says, "Did you feel a special connection with characters as Longshot because of his compassion, of the compassion you were talking about?"
Wait, a special connection to which character?
Longshot, when you were writing.
Longshot, yeah, because he had a certain spiritual innocence about him, and I think that's what, at least in my interpretation of the character, you know, that's what drew me in, and that's what was fascinating about that. I love the idea of the sort of the purer soul wandering through the world, through this whole chaos-filled, crazy, often very dark world, and yet this soul with there's a, I don't know if you get it down there. There's a show on Apple TV Plus called Ted Lasso. Has it gotten down?
Yeah. I love it.
I love it, and he's just a decent, really pretty innocent soul, and it doesn't matter what's spinning around him. He holds on to his essential decency and humanity, and I really respond to stories like that. We just binged the whole thing a couple of weeks ago, and I loved it. Yeah,
I absolutely loved it because you know what? In these times of darkness, and we need something like that, light, and you can relate to a soul like that. It's like
exactly.
It's a breath of fresh air. So I started and I couldn't stop until I finished the season. Yeah,
that's exactly how we felt. Yeah.
So Francisco Sanchez tells us, how could you tell us how is the process since you pitched the story that would become Last Hunt for Marvel until they accepted it for Spider-Man?
Just the process leading up to it. I mean,
from
the story went through.
And the pitch until they approved it. You know.
Okay. Because, like I said, it started out. I've said this before, and people always laugh. Originally, years before, I had this basic idea of coming back from the grave and the hero and the villain as a Wonder Man miniseries that I pitched to Tom DeFalco in like 1983 or something, and he, thank God, rejected it. Said, "Nah, I don't want to do that." Then but I like this idea of the hero coming out of the grave and that whole journey. What would that mean if you lost a chunk of your life? That whole thing. So I came up with a Batman version. I pitched it to Len Wein. There was a reason why he couldn't do it. I went away. I reworked the Batman story. I pitched it to Denny O'Neil. He rejected it. Now, the thing I've learned over the years is we talk about these stories being alive. The stories know more about where they need to be than you do. So that story was forming itself all through those years. Every rejection was important because it forced me to look at the story again and reshape it and move it. So then I got offered a gig writing the monthly Spectacular Spider-Man comic. And I thought, now is my last chance to do this story. So I worked the whole story out, and actually originally worked it out. Kraven wasn't in the story. I created a whole new villain. It was going to be a new villain in the story. And basically, I pitched it. The basic broad strokes of the story. They said, "This is great. Let's do it." And that was it. And then talk about happy accidents. And that story had so many happy accidents. I was just sitting in my office killing time, and I picked up a handbook of the Marvel Universe and randomly turned to Kraven. And I was reading about Kraven, and I kind of went, something clicked in my head, especially because it said that Kraven was Russian. I had never heard that before. And as someone who loves Dostoevsky and the whole, the Russian soul and the Russian duality, I went, oh my God, I love this character. I understand this character. I called the editor up and said, forget the new villain. We're using Kraven. Because Mike Zeck was going to draw it, we brought in Vermin, which was a character we had created when we did Captain America together. It also just so happened that Peter had just gotten married. That added a whole other element to the story. It also happened that he was in the black costume then. The black costume really was so important to the tone of that story. So all these accidents, quote, accidents, came together to form that story. And then the final part of it, which was difficult, we talk about suffering for your art. I was going through one of the worst periods of my life then. I was going through a lot of pain, a lot of struggle, a divorce, a lot of other things. But all that went into the story. So I think one of the reasons that that story has lasted is that the emotions are very authentic. Mm-hmm. Every single character in that story really is, I didn't realize it at the time, of course, some aspect of my own psyche and how I felt at that time. Mm-hmm. So all those elements came together. And it's almost like from the first moment I had that idea, whatever it was 6 years before then, the story itself knew where it had to go before it could express itself in the world. I didn't, but mm-hmm. the story did.
Okay. Let me see. Bernardo Alonso Pozo, yes, he was telling us the story, the Spectacular Spider-Man I was mentioning, it was with Puma and the Black Crow. The ending of that story was incredible.
Oh, thank you. Now I'm going to have to go back and reread it. I haven't looked at it in a long time. Yeah, that story allowed me to get a little bit more far out than a Spider-Man story usually gets because it used a lot of Native American mysticism and weaving the web of the universe. I remember all those themes. So I'm so glad that he brought that up. And I'm going to actually go back and pull that story out later today.
Okay. Ismael Fraile Rodriguez tells you, I love Blood, a Tale. From my heart, thanks a lot, JMs. Cheers from Seville.
Oh, thank you. Again, we talk about consciously writing from the unconscious. That was the exercise for that series, Blood a Tale, that I did with Kent Williams. Mm-hmm. I wanted to get my conscious mind out of the way and just let the story come out, and I'll figure it out later. Mm-hmm. And the joy of working with Kent was that Kent presented me with a sketchbook just filled with sketches that he'd done over the years. So I had this story brewing in my head. He had all these characters, and we kind of took it all like an ink blot, threw it at the wall, and whatever shapes it made, that's what the story became. And we worked very closely on that because we literally lived next door to each other at the time. Ah. And it really is, for me, I look back at it as a story that's came straight from my unconscious to the page with very little filter from me in between. Mm-hmm. And it's very unique. And we are talking right now to a publisher about bringing out a new edition next year. And hopefully a nice oversized art book edition, because Kent's work on that series is just phenomenal. I mean, Kent Williams and Jean-Jay Muth were very good friends too. So in that era of our lives, we were all hanging out together. So it was really great to hang out with these two brilliant artists and also all create together. Mm-hmm. It was a wonderful thing,
Absolutely. Giuseppe, in superhero comics, I always loved the soap opera aspect and the relationship between characters more than the action. And JLI was a blast in this sense. Was it hard to pitch these stories to DC?
No.
Because JLI was so unique in that sense. There was action, but even without it, it would have worked perfectly fine.
Yeah, like I said, there was nothing to pitch because we didn't know what we were doing. And here's the thing. We had a great editor, Andy Helfer, who was always there, to keep Keith from jumping off the cliff, to keep me from putting too many balloons on the page, to keep Kevin turning in pages because it was hard for him to get everything in on time, Kevin would sometimes literally be sitting in Andy's office next to his desk drawing pages. That was the way to get and bringing that all together. And so the story just evolved. And what Andy did, along with keeping the trains running on time, he protected us. If there were other editors who didn't like what was going on in the book or complained about the way we treated the characters, we didn't know about it. Andy dealt with that. Andy protected us and allowed us to just do what we wanted to do the way we wanted and nurtured us along. He was like our mother on that book. He really was. And he would, if he needed to complain like your mother to get you to do the work, he'd do that. If he needed to pinch your cheeks and give you compliments, he did that. He's a great editor and a great guy. It was wonderful to work with him.
Mm-hmm. Stefan Shelsen, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your second name. Why is it so hard to find your creator-owned work? I've only been able to find Moonshadow.
Really?
It's not difficult in Spain.
Right. I know that Blood came out a couple of years ago, and I think in several new editions. And hopefully, once we get this new edition out next year, we'll get more. And I know Moonshadow has just come out around the world. Yes, I know that most of my creator-owned stuff is available here in the United States. I don't know about what's going on in other countries.
Where are you, Stefan? Because of the second, you don't sound Spanish to me because of the second name, but maybe you're in Spain. And if you're in Spain, I can help you find it, because it is. You can find JM's creator-owned stuff in Spain easily.
I've tried in recent years to kind of over here to get like new editions out. I got new editions out of Seekers into the Mystery and Mercy, and we got Moonshadow and a lot of other things. Most of them are out there and are in print.
Yeah.
But that's always the trick, is to stay on top of it. And then if one publisher drops the ball, get it back and try to get it with another publisher and get it out there.
Absolutely. Jack Trapp, your Ghost Rider run changed the way I view stories in general. Can you tell us something about your experiences on that book?
Sure. It's a long time ago, so let me try to remember. The one thing that I remember most is that it was the first time I ever actively co-plotted a book with an artist. That Bob Budiansky was the pencil artist. And it was another case where we just hit it off. We just had great chemistry, and it was effortless. We'd get on the phone, and in half an hour we'd have a whole story, and then I'd go write the plot. He'd draw it, I'd dialogue it. So that was really fun. And also, it's what I've learned over the years. Even though it may not be my favorite genre, I don't think it is. When it comes to writing supernatural / horror, that's something that I seem to have a natural ability for. Mm-hmm. Even though may not be my first choice in what I want to read necessarily. I don't necessarily love horror, although I love the kind of Twilight Zone supernatural thriller kind of thing. But the Ghost Rider kind of right on the line between supernatural thriller and horror, and those characters, like the DC mystical characters, they allow you to get into other areas that you don't get into with the superheroes. You can get into bigger concepts, not just of concepts of who we are in here, but who we are in the broader universe. You have all these characters that literally a character can embody a whole philosophical concept. The other great thing with Ghost Rider was they let us know ahead of time, with enough time, that the book was being canceled, so that we actually, which rarely happens in comics, we finished Johnny Blaze's story. We ended it. He had, of course they brought him back, but at that time we ended his story and gave him his happily ever after, and that was really fun as well.
Yeah, and he should have been stayed that way. Now I think like he's the king of hell or something like that.
I've heard someone was telling me that. Yeah, I would rather he was out there being happy.
Let me see. Stefan Mackelsen says Moonshadow feels more like a poem with illustration than a normal comic. What was the mentality behind that?
I heard a quote years ago, and I've been trying to track it down. I read it, and now I cannot find who it was who said it. And I've repeated it so many times that I probably have changed it anyway, and I should take credit for it, But the quote was basically, when you sit down to work on a piece, you should take every thought, every feeling, every philosophy, every influence, the entirety of what you are, and channel it through that story. And I think Moonshadow was the first time that I did that I really took all of myself as a person and channeled it through a story. And my leanings as a reader and as a musician always lean more toward the poetic. I like language, and I like the poetry of language. I can do the other thing too, I can do the more realistic thing, but I really like the Bradbury, the Rod Serling, that sort of elevated thing. So writing poetically is certainly a natural thing for me. And I guess, on one level, it did feel sort of like a poem, but maybe it's an epic poem, because the great epic poems tell stories, right? So I like the idea of looking at Moonshadow as an epic poem that tells an epic tale.
Felipe González Hernández says, hello, Mr. DeMATTEIS. It's a pleasure to have you here. I have followed your career for years. I consider you a very versatile writer with very interesting topics. Where does the inspiration for your stories come from? I find your journeys of self-discovery of the interior and the cathartic process very interesting. Your time at Epic is a good example. Moonshadow is a great work. Blood too. Always wanted to be able to express these ideas in a space where you had more control.
Well, I had complete control. with those projects, and the projects that I did for Vertigo and creator-owned that's the great joy of the creator-owned books, is that you do have that. And what this person was just saying about this exploration of the inner life, because to me, that's what life is. You know, to me, I'm interested in the fundamental question, who am I? Why am I here? Now, the answer to that question might be emotional. It might be psychological. It might be metaphysical. It might be spiritual. And I like playing with all those different wheels and all those different answers, because there's, you know, who am I because of how I was raised? Who am I because what is the meaning of the universe? And what we were talking about before, am I like God dreaming a dream here, pretending to be me when I'm really God? There's so, and in between those two things, there are 1,000 different answers. But I think if you're here on this planet, the fundamental questions you're going to ask are, who am I and why am I here? And not everybody asks those questions, but those are the questions that have obsessed me since I was a kid. So that's why all my work is filled with that. I can't help it. It just comes out that way.
Yeah. Felipe also continues saying the psychological aspect has always been a constant in your work. I really like what you did with Kraven and your contribution to Kane among in your Spider-Man run. How did you get to write Spectre with Hal Jordan? For me, it was a good example of redemption for a character and magic. Did you want to continue telling that character's story with that character and his stories?
Yeah, you know, how I got the gig was the way a lot of gigs come along. Someone called me up and said, "Hey, you want this gig?" You say yes, because guess what? I have to pay the bills, so that's a good idea. I'll take that gig. But what attracted me to it is just what this person said: is that the redemption arc, because I think we're all on a redemption arc in some way. We're all, you know, we're all looking to find the line between our human selves and our divine selves, and we all have things in whether they're, again, the great thing about comics and melodramatic storytelling is you can take the small thing and literalize it in a much bigger way. So you know, maybe we didn't destroy an entire city the way Hal Jordan did, but we have things in our lives. We have regrets, we have faults, we have flaws, we have places where we failed, and we want to make up for that. So I always love the redemption arc in any story. And so I loved working on that. That was another one of those books where, even though it was a mainstream book, I got to really put so much of myself into it. I always felt, some years before that, I worked on Dr. Fate for a few years with Sean McManus. And it was also very, very personal. And I kind of continued the themes, even though it was a jump of years. I took the themes that I'd been working on in Dr. Fate and brought them over into the Spectre, but I was a different person by then. I had seen the world slightly differently. So those themes continued to grow and evolve. And yeah, I could have kept going with that book for a long time. In fact, what I wanted to do was redeem Hal Jordan and let him go back to being Green Lantern, bring in two new people to be the Spectre. My plan was to do two people. One would be the spirit of vengeance. One would be the spirit of redemption. And so you could get three characters for the price of one out of that. And I pitched it to DC. And they said no. So there you go.
Whoa.
But as Andre knows, it was before Andre. No, he knows, because he drew that character. In Justice League Dark, we did bring in a character who did become the spirit of redemption. So years later, I finally got to do that.
You got it your way.
I just have to ask, in terms of my own schedule, how much more time do we have here?
No, we can. I was thinking about finishing in 10 minutes. Is that okay?
That's perfect. Perfect. Yeah.
Okay. So because I always devote 1 hour for me talking to you and then 1 hour for the fans, because
okay, that's great.
You deserve it. I think you're okay with that.
I'm fine. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, Giuseppe says, loved your work on Martian Manhunter miniseries, drawn by Mark Badger. Loved the way he was portrayed, his fears and humanity. I think he's a lovely character. Yeah,
that's what I'm appreciating is people are bringing up stories of mine that I really, really like that don't get talked about a lot. You know, that kind of like sometimes the story comes out and it just kind of like nothing happens. And 10 years later, all of a sudden you run into people that said, I read that story. I really loved that story. It happened with the Spectre also. When the Spectre was coming out, there were a lot of people, I remember, that they wanted the old Spectre. They didn't want Hal Jordan as the Spectre, or they wanted Hal Jordan as Green Lantern. So they just hated the book. And then like 10 years later, I kept running into all these people that really read the book and got it. And so, now I forgot which book we were talking about here.
Martian
Manhunter. Yeah, another series that I really like. Mark Badger is a really interesting artist. Talk about having your own distinctive voice.
Absolutely.
From the get-go. He had his own visual language and his own voice. And again, it's the same thing. Here's a character who had been around for, like, at that point, probably 40 years, 30 years. How do you get into his head? How do you peel that head back and find new things to to play with, you know. So we gave him a sort of a revamped origin that really made it a much more emotional and psychological journey for him, and that was a lot of fun.
I think that what you were mentioning about, I remember those times with Hal as the Spectre, and people hating it, and I was loving it, and because I wasn't so invested in
Right.
in him as Green Lantern, you know what I mean?
Right.
For me, Wally West has always been the Flash, etc., etc. You know, I grew up with the New Teen Titans,
Right.
era. So for me, when they brought Hal back as Green Lantern, or you know, Barry Allen Flash as the Flash and all that, it felt forced. It didn't feel natural, because for me, the big difference between Marvel and DC is DC is based on legacy,
Right.
and of
Right.
course, Hal as Spectre made sense. You can get to a path where he's redeemed and he can be Green Lantern again, but you keep Kyle as the main Green Lantern.
Right.
You know?
Well, that's the great thing about the Green Lanterns. There's so many of them. You can have them all. Like Guy Gardner and John Stewart.
Exactly. So when I saw people hating it, I was like, why? You know, this is the logical path. He became a really bad guy. He got corrupted. He needs to find a path to redemption. You cannot just, hey, tomorrow, he's Green Lantern again. Like,
right. But that's another one of those series, because it was so personal and it got into those psychological and metaphysical realms that we're talking about. That's one of those series where people will come up to me very emotional sometimes about how much those stories meant to them. And it's so gratifying to me to know that what I intended did get through after all. Because like I said, when it was coming out, it didn't feel like people were getting it at all. So it was nice to find out that it did.
Yeah, absolutely. Jaime Carreño tells you you're a legend in the comics industry.
Thank you.
And Stefan Mackellan clarifies he's in Northern Canada.
Oh, okay.
They should
really?
be around.
I should at least be able to get these things, you know, from American publishers. Like Dover Books just a couple of years ago put out the first big collection of my Vertigo series, Secrets into the Mystery. They put out Mercy. I have to just look at my shelf. IDW put out Brooklyn Dreams in a beautiful hardcover edition. It just happens to be right here. You know, so most of it is out there. There are a few things that aren't, like I said, Blood isn't, but hopefully by next year, Blood will be.
Yeah, Stefan, if you can find them, just, you know, find me on Facebook or Twitter, etc., and I will give you links to find them, because again, they're easy to find. If they're easy to find in Spain, imagine in Canada. You know, one of your regular comic shop must have them for sure, or can order them. Giuseppe, just wanted to thank David for these interviews and JM, because he's always kind on Twitter. He always replies to my tweets. You know.
Well, I enjoyed it. That's why I reply. You know, it's a lot of people have negative experiences on Twitter, but what I found is, in general, if you put out something positive, what you're getting back is positive. You know, and I find I just, as I mentioned, I just did my workshop online for the first time. Whenever I do these workshops, I find inevitably it's a great group of people. The people, for whatever reason, the people that follow my work tend to be really, really nice people. The people that I interact with on Twitter, I enjoy it. Like I said, I spend a lot of time alone in a room. So to have someone show up on Twitter and talk to me and express how much they've enjoyed a story or what it's meant for them, it means a lot to me too. So I enjoy that interaction. I really do.
It's called karma, my friend.
Yes, that's right.
El Descampado asks, when did you realize that you had found your own voice as a writer? Do you remember that?
You know, there's two things. One is, you know, when I broke in at DC, that's where I kind of learned the basics. And working with Paul Levitz and Len Wein and Jack Harris, these wonderful editors. And then I went to Marvel, where suddenly I was handed like 3 monthly books in the Marvel universe, you know, after doing these little 8-page, 10-page stories at DC. And so I realized after the fact, what I did was I was in this mindset that said, oh, I'm writing Marvel comics, I'm writing superhero comics, and this is how you write them. My own voice couldn't quite get through. I worked on Defenders for about 3 years. That was the closest I came to, because the book had a tradition of being quirky, so it allowed me to be a little broader and quirkier. But I still wasn't quite there yet. And I did a story, an obscure little story for, Marvel had a black and white magazine called Bizarre Adventures. And I did a story called Greenberg the Vampire, which was an original thing of mine, that Steve Leialoha did the original thing. And then Mark Badger and I did a graphic novel after that. And I remember going up to the office, and all of a sudden, people that had never commented on my work were like, what a great story, love that story. And I realized, because it wasn't a Marvel character, it was my character, I had stepped outside of that. I was speaking in a voice that was natural. So that was the first glimmer that I got. but it really happened when I was writing Moonshadow. Because with Moonshadow, it was a 12-issue series. It was, by the time it was done, it was, I don't know, 300 pages or more. So and it had nothing to do with, not only with superhero comics, with any kind of comics ever. I wrote that as if I was sitting down to write a novel. And in the course of that, realized, oh, this is me. This is me writing. This is not Stan Lee to Len Wein to Steve Gerber to me. This is just me. Those influences are all there, but it's coming out as me for the first time. And that's why when I finished Moonshadow, I was able to go over and do something like Kraven's Last Hunt, because I had liberated myself, and I didn't have to write a comic book in any specific way. And I brought what I learned in Moonshadow to bear on a mainstream story. So that was the series that really set me free.
So the shackles were finally off, right?
The shackles were off. That's right. That's right.
El Descampado wants to tell you, I don't want to miss this opportunity to thank you for the good times you've given me and still give me with your stories. You've made me cry, thrill, and laugh. And man, that's an incredible journey.
You are very welcome. Thank you so much.
Okay, so last one, and I let you go because you also have a thing that is human, which is you need to eat because it's almost 1 p.m. for
It
you.
is. It's lunchtime. It's lunchtime.
So last one is, what do you still have in here that you need to tell that you haven't yet as a storyteller?
There's always more. It's kind of what I said before about what's over the next hill. And I have to tell you, one thing I've learned over the years is that some stories take a long time to come out. I've had stories that have taken 25 years from the first idea to when it came out in print. And I'm working on 3 or 4 different new stories right now. I've got other stories that have been circling the airport, in various forms for years. So as long as there is that drive to express, and there's also, we talk about, there are certain themes in my work that crop up again and again and again. But you also hope that as you get older, those themes deepen and the way that you express them deepen. You read any writer, and it doesn't matter what genre they're working with, you will find the same themes and ideas recurring in all their work, because we're all basically trying to figure out ourselves and our lives. Yeah. So my hope is that if I live to be 110, I will be writing till I'm 110, and I'll continue to explore these ideas and these themes in deeper and deeper ways,
Yeah, I always remember the best answer to this question was Peter Milligan. When I asked him this, he literally said, the one I'm writing right now. Why wait? Yeah. Why wait?
And then there's always the next one over that hill. I love the hill. It's a great idea. You climb the next hill, even if you think you're done, oh, look, there's another story. There's a whole country. There's a country on the other side of the hill that I never knew existed.
Yeah, the undiscovered country.
That's right. That's right.
Anyway, so we're done. People keeps telling you, you're always you're a great, kind person, a great guy. 2 hours have been a confirmation of how a great guy JM is. Namaste. They're all telling you amazing things because you deserve them. So with this, guys, we're leaving. Thank you, JM, for being here. Please don't.
Pleasure.
I want to say proper thank you after we got it.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for being here. Thank you, Descampado, Rita, Giuseppe, and all of you who sent comments. You've been amazing. Wear a mask. Don't be assholes. Remember that. And see you all tomorrow with Mr. Josep Busquet in Spanish, con Josep Busquet y Andrea Torrejón. Take care. Bye-bye. We're off in 3,